Hello, my name is Simon Hobson, and today's episode I'm joined by Robert Humphries. Robert is an inaugural director of the Great Plains Welsh Heritage Centre in Wymore, Nebraska, in the USA. He is an independent scholar and translator with a master's degree in Celtic studies from the University of Wales, Trinity Saint David. His research focuses on Welsh diaspora in the United States during the 19th and early 20th centuries, particularly examining the role of the Welsh language in shaping ethnic identity and its interaction with the American society and politics. In addition to his scholarly work, Robert has also co-produced the documentary Pobl y Paith, People of the Prairie, which also explores Welsh immigration and settlement in Nebraska. So, Croeso, welcome.
Wel, diolch yn fawr. Prynhawn da, Simon, o Wisconsin, lle dwi'n byw. Good afternoon from Wisconsin, which is where I live.
Great. So perhaps you could give us a little bit of your backstory, your childhood, and what sort of took you to the US, really.
Well, I always tell people it's a long and complicated story, but I was born in Newport, Gwent, and was raised just outside of Newport as a small child in Llanmartin. My father was a steel worker at the time at Llanwern, and unfortunately he passed away with leukemia when I was just a few years old, when I was 3 years old. A few years later, my mother remarried, and we moved with my stepfather, who was from Devon, to Bristol. And so I spent a lot of my childhood there in Bristol, very close to Wales. We were constantly traveling back to see family there, and spent a lot of time just traipsing around castles and seeing the sights of South Wales, as well as spending time with family. So I was identified very strongly as Welsh. I do have a half-brother and half-sister who were born in England. And so then after spending some time in England, when I was about 14 years old, I was just about to start my A-levels in school, and my stepdad was hired by General Electric in Cincinnati, Ohio. He was an aeronautical engineer, and so we moved to the United States, and I finished up my secondary education in Cincinnati. I attended Miami University, which is in Oxford, Ohio, and after that I was working for a few years in Cincinnati. There I met my wife, who is an American of Welsh ancestry, and she had her Welsh ancestors had actually come to Wisconsin. They were Unitarians. They had fled the hostile environment to Unitarianism in West Wales in the 1840s. And that area, if you may know, was called the Black Spot, a spot indeed by the surrounding Calvinists. They came to Wisconsin, and because of that, my wife had a connection with this particular area, and there is actually a family chapel that was built in the 1880s. By the Reverend Jenkyn Lloyd Jones, who is a member of the family, and incidentally, the architect Frank Lloyd Wright is also a member of that lineage as well. She brought me up here. I fell in love with the place. I thought it reminded me of Wales, actually, and we found work here, and we moved here. And so in the year 2000, I started living here in Wisconsin. In 2003, our first child came along. My wife's name, by the way, is Jennifer. My daughter's name was Rhiannon. She was born with some very complicated genetic condition, which meant that for a long time we were in and out of hospital a lot. Had a very complicated life, obviously caring and looking after her. That was a huge part of our lives. And she passed away in 2022, which obviously was a huge
Yes.
had a huge impact on us. We do have Rhiannon has had a little brother named Reese, who is now in high school here in Spring Green, Wisconsin. So, in addition to that, I wanted to get back to education, but get back to school after having graduated with a bachelor's. I wanted to move on and get a master's, and I took the opportunity to work on a master's degree in Celtic Studies through the University of Wales Lampeter, as it was called then, now Trinity Saint David. And so I started that in 2008 and finished that up in 2012. And I really wanted to research the history of Welsh people in this particular area of Wisconsin. There was a significant Welsh population, small but significant, in a number of communities very close to where I live here. Obviously, there were my wife's ancestors, but some of the other surrounding towns had significant Welsh populations, Welsh-speaking populations. If I actually just leaving my house and just going just a mile away, I can visit our local cemetery where there are numerous inscriptions in Welsh on the gravestones.
I just wanted to interject, sorry, just something from your own history there. So did you grow up in a Welsh-speaking household?
No, I did not. I grew up in an English-speaking household. My ancestry is very much focused on the border area around Monmouth and so Monmouth, Mitchell, Troy, the village of Mitchell, Troy, Abergavenny, those areas. And so I don't have ancestors that spoke Welsh for probably 100, 200 years. And then also I have ancestry of people who came into Wales during the Industrial Revolution from Gloucestershire, from Bristol, from the West Country. That's my sort of ancestral makeup. And culturally speaking, no, I do not come from a Welsh-speaking background. You're probably wondering how I got to speak Welsh. And
that was my next question. Yes.
so I guess it's really determination on my part. Even as a child, I really felt like I wanted to learn Welsh, and I remember going to the County of Avon local branch of the County of Avon Library and picking up Teach Yourself Welsh, which in at that time it was a very, very old book that I got from the library, and it was quite useless really for me at that time with Welsh as it is spoken. But over the years, I got hold of a more recent copy of, more up-to-date copy of Teach Yourself Welsh, and I would say actually the internet and the ability to listen to Welsh media here in the States, that really helped me, really focus on the language, and so over the years through some self-teaching. Listening to the media, interacting with Welsh speakers, I've reached a level of. Some people would say I'm fluent. I'm a little modest, perhaps, and so I tried to say that maybe I'm not quite fluent. I've encountered people here, Welsh learners in the United States, who I think speak absolutely perfect Welsh. People who were not, raised in Wales or have any. Some of these people don't even have any Welsh ancestry, or their connection is just out of interest. So that's my Welsh speaking background, or my entry into the Welsh language.
So that was admirable, the determination. Is there you mentioned about American nationals learning the Welsh language, and is there a Welsh language education within US schools, or does it have to be Saturday clubs and additional, self-determination and families pushing that forward?
Well, in the United States, there really isn't any sort of any Welsh language education at a at a primary or secondary school level. What you have is, within the education system, there are some universities and colleges, a small number, where I know Welsh is taught. Welsh language courses, of course, is Rio Grande University, which is in Ohio. There was a corner of southeastern Ohio where there was a large concentration of Welsh settlement, and the legacy of that is the Madog Center for Welsh Studies at Rio Grande University, and they do some Welsh courses. And then I know that the Brigham Young University in Utah, particularly because of the Latter-day Saints and the Welsh contingent in that religious movement, and those settlers who went to Utah, they also offer teach Welsh courses. Outside of that, I know that there are some colleges and universities that might teach Welsh as part of they might teach medieval Welsh or Middle Welsh as part of a study of historic language and literature. I know that there is a college in Arkansas, for example, where I've been told there are about 40 students currently learning Middle Welsh and studying Middle Welsh texts. In terms of on a community level, I know of one family in Rio Grande, in the Rio Grande area in Ohio, who there's a young man who speaks fluent Welsh. His father speaks Welsh. His grandmother is the one who came from Wales, and he wanted the son wanted the grandson wanted to be able to speak Welsh with his grandmother, and so we have 3 generations. So that's an example of it being passed down within a family.
But I imagine that's quite rare now, is it?
I would say that it is, unfortunately, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's a lot less migration from Wales than there used to be, and we'll probably get into that, I guess, later in the discussion. Yeah. I did want to also point out a couple of organizations, I'd like to point out another organization that is very active in promoting the Welsh language, and that's based in North America, and that is Cymdeithas Madog, not to be confused with the Madog Center, but Cymdeithas Madog runs something called Cwrs Cymraeg, which is they're a very small organization, and they bring together teachers. Sometimes people come over from Wales to teach a residential course for about a week during the summer. It moves around the country, or moves around both the United States and Canada, and it's usually located at a small college where people can stay in dorms and then get classroom teaching, and that's a very effective organization for bringing together people who have enthusiasm for the Welsh language, and it's a very inclusive and welcoming environment. And then in addition to that course, they also run what's called a Siop Siarad, which is an online Zoom meeting every month where you can, and it's set up for different levels of Welsh proficiency, and you can have a conversation with other people in Welsh. So again, it's very outside of a few university programs. It's all very avocational.
So what led to the idea of the Great Plains Welsh Heritage Centre? How did that come about?
So the Great Plains Welsh Heritage Project, as its sort of official sort of umbrella term is, was established. Actually, we're celebrating our 25th anniversary. So it was established in 2000, and it began as a local history project in the community of Wymore, Nebraska. For those who are not familiar with North American geography, it's pretty much in the center of the United States. It's on the eastern edge of the Great Plains region, which is, as its name suggests, a fairly flat expanse of land. It's an agricultural community today, and it began because there was an elderly member of the community. His name was Ellsworth Closs, and he was pretty much the last Welsh speaker in that community. He spoke some Welsh. His parents had come from Wales, immigrated from Wales, and he died in the year 2000. And there was he left a legacy which the people of Wymore wanted to utilize and honor. And so, they decided that they wanted to explore the history of the Welsh community that had settled there. And this isn't a particularly large ethnic Welsh community. There were about 20 or 30 families that arrived in the 1880s in this particular area of Nebraska. And they established essentially what scholars might call a sort of an unbounded agricultural community. They were just a collection of farms located around, and the center of the community, I should say, was the Welsh Calvinistic Methodist Church called Bethel. And today, if you go to Wymore, you will find that the church is gone, but the cemetery is still there, and you can find again a few Welsh inscriptions on the gravestones. And so over the years, the Great Plains Welsh Heritage Project started with a very small group of people of Welsh ancestry in Wymore wanting to celebrate their cultural ethnic heritage. They purchased a building to create a museum, a small museum, and they started holding a Welsh festival periodically. And over the years, it just became a much bigger enterprise. They began getting a lot of donations from people across North America of Welsh items related to the Welsh diaspora in North America. And those, with all of those donations, they decided to raise money for an archive building. So it has that part of the center in Wymore is a purpose-built archive room, and this is it regulates temperature, and it has a fire suppression system. It's tornado proof, which is extremely important in Nebraska. And so with all of that, that there was also an endowment that was set aside to pay for a director. And so I have been involved with the Great Plains Welsh Heritage Center for about a decade, a little over a decade. After I finished my master's degree, I was continue to be interested in the history of the Welsh diaspora in North America, and I was sort of drafted into the organization out of while reaching out for some research materials, and joined the board. I then contributed with the video Pobl y Paith, the Welsh in Nebraska, and Pobl y Paith, I should say, means people of the prairie. Pobl y Paith, the people of the prairie, the Welsh in Nebraska is the full title. And that is a 20-minute documentary which tells the story of Welsh migration settlement in Nebraska, has interviews with people who are descendants of those immigrants. And that was actually produced as partly to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the state of Nebraska. So once I did that, and then I've been involved in translations from those, translating things, or articles and letters and newspaper material from in the Welsh language into English, interpreting that, helping with displays and exhibits. And in 2023, we had the North American Festival of Wales in Lincoln, Nebraska, which is about an hour north of Wymore. And at that point, I was asked to become the director.
So is the archive there for collecting the Welsh heritage from the whole United States, or is it specific to the Nebraska area?
It's really for the entirety of North America.
Okay.
So we have donations, items donated from it's people who have Welsh ancestors and who items that they brought with them from Wales, which people have donated to us. There are more recent Welsh immigrants who have their own possessions which they have bequeathed to us, and again, and we also have records of Welsh societies. So Welsh societies and organizations across North America have been donating their records to us for safekeeping in our archive.
So when one thinks of the United States and immigration of the 19th and 20th century, I would imagine most would think of the Irish and perhaps the Scots as well in certain areas, but the Welsh don't often share that story. So why do you think that is, and what really was your studies shown you about that history?
Well, if you actually look at the ethnic identity of that Americans recognize within their own ancestry, I think the largest contributor is Germany, and even though it's an English-speaking country. So, one of the things that I know, and I'm sure you know about 19th century Wales, is that there was a lot more internal migration within Wales because of the Industrial Revolution than there was external migration to other parts of the world. But there was, of course, it was still significant, and but Wales, of course, is a much smaller country. The population was much smaller, and so the numbers of people migrating in comparison, relative to immigrants from Germany and Ireland, Scandinavia, other parts of Europe, was much smaller, relatively speaking. So because of that, there are a few places in there are pockets of Welsh people across. There were pockets of Welsh people, little Welsh communities scattered throughout the United States in the 19th century. But many of them were quite small, and that's certainly true the further west you go. The most significant and largest numbers of Welsh were concentrated, I think, in the eastern states, in places like Utica, New York, and its surrounding area, parts of Pennsylvania. Obviously, very early on in colonial history, you have the migration of the Welsh Quakers and Baptists to Pennsylvania. You obviously have the large numbers of Welsh in coal mining in Pennsylvania, but there were also Welsh coal miners in Kansas and Iowa and Montana. So it's a much more scattered community overall, outside of a few significant areas.
And has there been, because I think here that the Irish diaspora, it affects the culture. It shapes some of the culture of the US itself. There's St. Patrick's Day, which is celebrated by everyone, even when they're not Irish, and we don't see that with St. David's or the Welsh diaspora. Is that purely down to being smaller numbers of immigrants, or is there something about the way that the settlements of Welsh individuals fell across the US, or how they integrated and changed and saw themselves as American, maybe perhaps quicker than the Irish?
Well, I think that's a very important question, and I think it's a combination of things. Yes, it's partly because of smaller numbers of Welsh people. I think that Welsh culture in the United States, in particular in the 19th century, the leaders of Welsh communities, the people looked up to, were the was the clergy. And when I mean the clergy, I mean the Welsh Calvinistic, the Calvinistic Methodist, later Presbyterian ministry. You have the Baptists, you have the Congregationalists. Of course, the congregation were sort of already fully integrated. They were sort of integrated into the American denominations pretty quickly. And the Calvinistic Methodists, their mindset was quite. They come across as very serious people,
Yeah.
and they were very keen on the idea of obeying authority and aligning with the aligning with the state, essentially, even if there was some even if there was at times some friction about differences of culture and language. And in the United States, what you see is Welsh communities where the Welsh language, for instance, is really seen, I think, as it was sort of in Wales by many people, as the language of the church, of religion, of personal family life. Whereas, and certainly with the reality of life for these immigrants was that, the economic life, political, public life, all of that was going on around them in English. And so there was also, you certainly see a back and forth conversation among the Welsh in the 19th century, in their publications, for example, about how much they should be using Welsh. And over time, there was a lot of pressure within the Welsh community to assimilate, and there was still some nostalgic connection to the language, but I also don't want to overemphasize that, because there were 1 to 2 generations, depending upon the family, of Welsh speakers born and raised in the United States. So you have people who were, who were born into Welsh families. They might have been born in Wales, or they might have been born in the United States, but they were raised in the United States in a Welsh-speaking community. All of their neighbors are Welsh. They go to a Welsh church. They might go to a public school where they would learn and be taught in English. But these people are interacting with their families, with their communities, with people in other Welsh communities, with people in the homeland, in the Welsh language. And so you have, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a very strong Welsh ethnic, I should say a Welsh American ethnic identity. People who are Welsh in language and culture, but American in the way in which they identified themselves, and how they aligned themselves with a sort of a political mindset.
So still thinking about the language, then it's your studies have shown that it was the majority of immigrants were from Welsh-speaking families. They weren't English-speaking Welsh so much.
Well, I think that's an important point to remember, is that English-speaking Welsh people tended to be sort of assimilated into English-speaking American culture. If you look, of course, at the 19th century, the majority of people in Wales spoke Welsh, outside of areas like where my ancestors came from, eastern Monmouthshire, and parts of the borderlands, and of course Pembrokeshire, under below the Landskir, and so. But because the majority, when I'm talking about Welsh people in the United States in the 19th century, I'm mostly speaking about Welsh-speaking people, because most of the people who were identified as Welsh were Welsh-speaking. We do have some interesting stories of there is a community in here in Wisconsin where there was some Welsh settlement from I think it was Radnorshire, and they were English speaking, and they were assumed to be English, and many of them may well have actually identified as English, but over the time, their descendants have celebrated their Welshness, and so it's harder to find those people. Another thing that I'm very interested in, I would love to learn more about, are people who were Welsh speaking, came to America and wanted nothing to do with Wales and their Welsh ancestry. And of course, those people are hard to find because they just kind of, they didn't necessarily stick around in Welsh communities. They were just individuals who just assimilated into the mainstream. So there are lots of different strands of Welsh immigration to explore.
And is there any history? I live in Quebec, and obviously Quebec and the Quebecois language, the French language, has a history of being suppressed there. And it's only in the last 40, 50 years that it's really found itself and found its political and economic voice. And obviously, as you've said, we're talking about smaller numbers, and maybe the way the United States works wouldn't have encouraged rebellion or outspokenness. But is there any history or any historic evidence of Welsh communities pushing back at Anglicisation or Americanisms?
I think that part of that was, to the extent that there was a sense of protecting the language or their identity, I think that comes across in the decisions about how and where they would migrate. And even then, I think there was some ambivalence about it, but where you have examples of people migrating, together in significant numbers, you have these chain migration phenomena where people, obviously they write back to Wales and they say, "Come here; it's a great place to settle." In some cases, they wanted a critical mass of people so that they could worship in their own language. That was very important to these people, was that they could have a sense of community through religion and through being able to support a Welsh-speaking church. There were also emigration companies that were set up. There was one set up in New York, for example, in the late 1860s to buy land from a railroad in Kansas, and a community was set up called Bala, Kansas, and it was a consortium of a group of Welsh ministers and fairly well-off Welshmen in New York who then bought this land and then offered it to Welsh people either for free or for a very low cost. And the idea there was to create a Welsh community. So I think that was partly because that was seen as a way of I think there was a desire to create Welsh communities, but at the same time, and it seems contradictory because at the same time, I think there was a sense that they also wanted to assimilate. They certainly wanted to assimilate American ideals and the sort of an American ideology. They weren't necessarily particularly attached to the British Crown or the British state, but they were very eager to be part of the United States. And for a time, and depending upon where they were and their own dispositions, there was some eagerness to kind of maintain some sort of Welsh linguistic identity.
I suppose that's where the difference would have occurred in the immigration, is if you were still wedded to the British Empire and that ideal, you're more likely to emigrate to Canada, say, or Australia. I don't know if that's my suggestion. Maybe I don't have obviously any history knowledge or academic to back that up, but that's my sense of feeling about it.
I think that there was a lot going on ideologically in the Welsh people's heads in the 19th century, and with example of, for instance, my wife's ancestors, the Lloyd Jones family from near Llandyssil, they were radical Unitarians. They were part of the they had been involved in the Rebecca riots. Oh. They were and of course the Unitarians were among the most radical sort of Republican, small r Republican leaning groups in Wales at that time, and so they found themselves, it's appropriate that this is called New Wales, this podcast, because that's what they wanted. They wanted a new Wales, but they also wanted a new sort of a new political structure for themselves, and they wanted that. They felt that they could acquire that in the United States. That wasn't necessarily the prime motivator for most immigrants. I think they were more interested in just being able to, to have land to farm, and be able to, to benefit economically from migration. But I think it did have an impact on their mindset, and you see a lot of American patriotism among the Welsh, particularly if you look at Welsh publications like Adrych, which was the newspaper that was published from 1851, and there were several other Welsh publications, a Cyfaill o'r Henw Wlad, the friend from the old country. Even if you look at the iconography of the mastheads on those publications and the covers of those publications, you see this this sort of combination of the ancient Welsh culture. You see these little druids and and standing stones on one side, and then you see industry and the symbols of the American Republic on the other side of the masthead. So they're trying to sort of show that they want to move to this new country, this new way of thinking, but at the same time they don't want to completely lose they want to maintain that culture, and they're proud of being part of both of those cultures.
Yeah, I thought, well, that's partly what New Wales is about. It's about starting the conversations with the citizens of Wales. How do we learn from history, culture, diaspora? And you mentioned there about the media, and one of the things that strikes me is that, unlike English, French, and Spanish as examples, obviously Welsh remains pretty much absent from online spaces, and news headlines, and even within the United Kingdom, there are very few people outside of Wales that would even know a single word in Welsh. So is the Welsh linguistic invisibility in an online world, is that hampering Wales developing its own global internationalist identity, do you think?
Yes, I think so. I think it's really important that the Welsh language is seen and recognized, and I think we've all seen the joke about the Welsh language being created by a cat walking across a keyboard, those sort of things, which as Welsh people we either roll our eyes at or just kind of let roll off our back. But I think there's a definite need for both the Welsh language and even just Welsh identity, an acknowledgement of Cymru and the Cymru needs to be out there in the world. And if I can demonstrate, if I can sort of illustrate this, living in the United States, I've lived in Ohio, I've lived in Wisconsin, and I've been to other places. And when I came to Ohio, I lived in Ohio for 10 years, and I had absolutely no idea that there had been Welsh immigration. And even when I was at Miami University, it was a few miles away from Paddy's Run, which is the first Welsh settlement in Ohio, and I was completely unaware of that when I was in college. And it's only after learning about studying Welsh, the Welsh diaspora, that I came to know this. But also when I was living in Ohio, nobody knew anything about Wales. I mean, that probably, I was in Cincinnati. Now, if I'd been living further east in Ohio, where there was a strong sense of Welsh identity, that wouldn't have been the case. But where I was living, where there had still been some Welsh presence, people didn't know anything about Wales. It was you would say Wales and you would just get a blank stare. That changed when I came to Wisconsin, where there was more of a presence, and so more people that have oh yes, they have a Welsh ancestor. They remember somebody in their family tree, or their youth who was of Welsh origin. So so it really, there really is a problem, I think, with Welshness not being understood and recognized on a global scale.
And what do you think is the answer to that? If we think about the United States, how influential can the Welsh diaspora be on helping that journey? Obviously, large numbers of the Welsh diaspora are very successfully made lives there. They're successful business people. There's a great deal of economic and political power that the Welsh diaspora could exert into the US system, but it doesn't appear from outside of the US to be the case. So is there any truth in what I've just said, or and if so, how would that be taken advantage of to help develop that identity for Wales within the US?
Well, I think that's a big question. I think one of the things I can speak for myself is that I'm trying to raise awareness of this particular of these Welsh contributions to North American history in both the United States and Canada, and trying to foster connections with people back in Wales. And we do have a lot of connections already. A lot of these are very personal connections between people who live here, who even a couple of generations back, people still keep in contact with their cousins. That's obviously on a more personal community level, really. But I think through making people more aware of this history, and raising the profile of Welsh ethnic communities historically, as well as individuals and organizations that over the years have continued to be prominent. I think that's one of the things that we can do to raise awareness. I think awareness is the biggest issue here. I think in terms of people, there are a lot of people, innovators, entrepreneurs who have left Wales. My hope is that looking back at my homeland, I hope that people can bring some of that back or be inspired by it, to really bring that sort of spirit back into Wales, or at least I think it's there. It just elevate it, and really so that it bears some fruit.
What do you think of the risks to Wales as a nation if it fails to embrace the diaspora and understand its own history with regards to that immigration? We see the Irish, a brilliant example of a nation that's very good at interacting with its diaspora and asking them to be involved with business and putting money and community projects together. And I don't think we see that so much with Wales and Welsh diaspora. How do we change that?
Well, I think that's true. I mean, I know that when we have the North American Festival of Wales, every year in the United States and Canada, there are representatives of the Welsh government that come, and I know that they're sort of attached to the British Embassy in Washington or Toronto or Ottawa, and their role is really just to sort of make connections and hopefully build up some trade and business relationships. I know that's the major focus for them. I think that hold on, I got to compose my thoughts here.
That's fine. I believe there's a cross-party caucus of senators and representatives with some Welsh heritage. I don't think it's particularly big in membership, but that seems like something that could be used taken more advantage of by organisations and government within Wales, and doesn't seem to be.
Yes, I think that would be good. I don't hear much about it, and I don't hear read much discussion of it among Welsh the Welsh American community. But it is something that we could certainly try to leverage. I think that there needs to be more interaction from more engagement from the Senedd in Cardiff Bay, the Welsh government, and I know that resources are tight right now, but I don't know that. I think they could find economical ways of reaching out and engaging with the North American Welsh community, and encouraging and finding ways to sponsor things. There is some sponsorship of the North American Festival of Wales, for example. I would love to see more engagement, and maybe this is something I can do too on my end, is engage with the Welsh Assembly government. Sorry, I shouldn't call it that. Edit that out. So one thing that I can do from my side of the Atlantic is engage with the Welsh government, with the Senedd, and as I get more on board with things here with the Great Plains Welsh Heritage Centre, that's something that I intend to do. But yes, I think that it's important to engage with for Wales to engage with its diaspora, both its historical diaspora and its current diaspora. I think I do think that some of us sometimes feel a little abandoned or distant sometimes from Wales, and I feel a lot less personally because I'm so engaged. But I think that is a feeling that some people have. Another thing I'd like to address too is there's one thing that I think causes a lot of hesitancy about engaging with the diaspora is there has been a lot of very commendable and important work recently on colonization and the impact of colonialism and Welsh participation in colonialism, and the impact of slavery and the dispossession of indigenous peoples in North America, in Australia, in Patagonia. All of that is very valid and important work, but I think that sometimes that makes people feel a little bit standoffish about engaging with the diaspora, out of a sense that we Welsh, the colonized, have become colonizers. And I think it's possible to recognize that aspect of history. It's it's something that is an unavoidable reality of history in the settler societies. But we can still commemorate and still engage with this history and recognize the positive aspects of that as well. So I think that's an important thing that gets. I think that's one of the reasons too why there's some hesitancy within Wales to engage with the history of Welsh people, particularly in North America.
But there's so much benefit for the future for doing so, and one of the objectives of New Wales is to get people to have that conversation. And as you say, history is by its very nature something that's been done and passed, and you can't avoid it, but you can deal with it in a mature and intellectually rigorous way. So I think it's very important that people, one of the reasons why I wanted to speak with yourself, to understand this aspect of Wales and the nation, and where modern Wales, part of its story, how it arrived at where it is today, and that diaspora can be part of the future as well, and should be part of the future. So how because we're getting towards the end of the pod, and I'd quite like to know your personal views on how you'd like to see and think Wales might look, maybe from your speciality of research, in the next 15 years or so. 15 years from now, how would you like Wales to look? Where would you like it to be recognised in the world? Have you got thoughts on that?
Well, I certainly hope that Wales has a higher profile than it does now globally, certainly here in the United States, and that's something that I'll be working towards, is raising awareness of our country and its heritage and its history, its language, and and it's through the contributions and participation of Cymru in the United States, and also Canada. That's part of our mandate with the Great Plains Welsh Heritage Centre and North American Welsh organizations. And so yes, I want to see greater awareness, greater recognition. Maybe we can make Wales a household name, as they say, and something that people know about, because people, famously, Americans don't really know a whole lot about Great Britain outside of England and maybe Scotland and Ireland. Wales is often forgotten about or mentioned very briefly, and so I would love to make people more aware of that, make people recognize that history. Also, really get people on board with understanding the history on a deeper level. And I mean both people on both sides of the Atlantic. There tends to be a focus on myths like, Prince Madog, for example, or the technical term for this is philopietism, where there's sort of an exaggerated sense of impact. One of this examples of this is talking about, constantly talking about how many U.S. presidents have Welsh ancestry, which,
right,
it's an interesting point, but to what extent were any of these people, any of these men, really engaged with their Welsh ancestry or with Welsh culture? I would rather talk about for example, the Welsh immigrants who, I studied one Welsh community here in Wisconsin, where they arrived in the 1840s, and they set up a school system within their community, and they recorded all of their meetings and transactions in Welsh. Until other immigrants came in who were not Welsh speaking, and they needed to switch to English. It's that kind of deeper history that I'm really interested in, and I think has more power and meaning than some of these more popular narratives. And I think if we can get people to understand the extent and the depth of people's the depth of the history rather than these sort of more superficial stories. I think we can have a greater impact, and that's one of the things that I'm trying to do with my scholarly work and also with the Great Plains Welsh Heritage Centre.
So, Robert, what is coming up for the Welsh diaspora in the US? Have you got websites or socials that you would like to tell people about?
Well, of course, we have the North American Festival of Wales, the NAFOW, which this year is taking place in Ottawa and in Canada. And so we have, there are performers coming from Wales to that event. I'm not involved in planning that the festival. I will actually be giving a couple of presentations there, though. At the Great Plains Welsh Heritage Centre in Nebraska, we are busy with a couple of things. It's our 25th anniversary this year, and we have a concert coming up in the summer with some Nebraska musicians who specialize in European ethnic music, and they'll be performing some Welsh music for us. And we also are embarking on a digitization project. We want to digitize more of our collections so that people can access the materials we have online. We're doing this in conjunction with the People's Collection Wales at the National Library of Wales in Aberystwyth. And we just purchased our scanner, so we hope to have some of this material up online later this year. Probably the biggest thing for us is the expansion of our museum. We are currently trying to raise $175,000 to add a 3,300 square foot exhibition space to our Welsh Heritage Centre in Wymore, that'll allow us to get more things out of the archive for display, tell the story of the Welsh diaspora in North America more effectively. And if you want to learn about those things, if you want to become a member, we have a quarterly newsletter, which also includes, in addition to news about what we do, it has articles and stories about the history of Welsh people in the Great Plains region and beyond, historically. And if you want to learn more, if you want to donate, if you want to become a member, please go to our website, which is greatplainswelsh.org. And we're also on Facebook as well, the Great Plains Welsh Heritage Centre.
That's great. Robert Humphries, diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much for being a guest. And all the best.
Well, diolch yn fawr, oedd yn bleser sgwrsio gyda ti heddiw, Simon. It was a pleasure to talk to you today.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more conversations with people who want to build the future of Wales. And do go and find, like and enjoy new.wales across all your favourite social media channels.